and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today, we'll be talking about grade 6. Today will be a grade 7 English lesson on vague pronoun references. So vague pronoun reference. So we'll be doing our grade 7 English lesson on vague pronoun references. And before we start with our lesson on vague pronoun reference, we are going to log into aplusstudents.ca. We're going to log in with our username as well as our password. So once we have logged in with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of language arts. And then grade 7. And once we have selected grade 7, and then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of vague pronoun references. So vague pronoun references. So vague pronoun references, right? So the word vague. So especially if we listen to the word or we look at the word vague, right? Then we can clearly see that vague, it means it's either, let's say, indefinite, right? Or vague is like when it's not maybe clear enough, right? So it's either that it's indefinite or it's uncertain or it is not clear at all, right? It's unclear. So that is vague, right? So which means that vague pronoun references, right? It's to do with pronouns or the pronouncing as well as referencing. So we're now going to find out what is vague pronoun references. So we said vague pronoun references, right? And before we continue, right, our chapter is vague pronoun references. Our subject is English, which is also language arts, grade 7. And then the lessons that we're going to be focusing on under vague pronoun references is to identify the vague pronoun references and to identify all of the possible antecedents. And we are doing our lesson, our tutorial lesson on aplusstudents.ca. We're also going to be doing a test on aplusstudents.ca. And when you are Let's say later on, if you want to recap, go over the work, you may also do so on a plus students.ca. All right, so now we're going to find out what is vague pronoun references. So in writing, you need to make sure to avoid vague pronoun references. And a vague pronoun reference, it occurs when a pronoun could refer to more than one possible antecedent. So basically, when we write, we need to make sure to avoid vague pronoun references. Okay? And a vague pronoun reference occurs when a pronoun could refer to more than one person, more than a possible antecedent. Sorry. For example, when Lisa and Kim finally landed, she breathed a sigh of relief. So now you need to ask yourself, who breathed a sigh of relief? Because it says Lisa and Kim, they finally landed. So this is already the start of vague pronoun references, right? So when Lisa and Kim finally landed, she breathed a sigh of relief. So it's like you're asking yourself, like, who breathed a sigh of relief? So the pronoun, if we look at the pronouns she, could refer to either Lisa or Kim. So which means that this message or the meaning of the sentence is unclear. And that is why we call it a vague pronoun reference. So your pronoun she, which is she that we just underlined, could refer to either Lisa or it could refer to Kim because both of them landed, right? So which means that the meaning over here is unclear, and that is why we call it vague. So this is basically unclear because it says Lisa and Kim finally landed, but she says she breathed a sigh of relief. So it's basically us asking, so who breathed a sigh of relief? And then when it comes to the vague pronoun references, right, and how it can be corrected in, like in a few ways, right? Remember, we said a vague pronoun reference is when when something or words or whatever is actually not clear. It's not clear enough, right? It is unclear. Because if we look at the example once again of when Lisa and Kim finally landed, she breathed a sigh of relief. My thing's like both Lisa and Kim landed. Can you hear me now properly? So both Lisa and Kim finally landed, right? But now they're saying she breathed a sigh of relief. But now both Lisa and Kim landed, and both of them are ladies, right? Which means that this is unclear because we don't know who they are actually referring to. Are they referring to Lisa or are they referring to Kim? And when it comes to vague pronoun referencing, right, it can be corrected in two ways. So when it comes to vague pronoun referencing, right, we can correct it in one or two ways. The first way, right, is to replace the pronoun with its correct antecedent. For example, when Lisa and Kim finally landed, Lisa breathed a sigh of relief. So that is basically the two ways in which it can be corrected. It's either we replace the pronoun with its correct antecedent, which is, for example, when Lisa and Kim finally landed, Lisa breathed a sigh of relief. So that is the first way of, let's say, fixing. Is the word fixing? Or let's say correcting a vague pronoun difference. Then also you can rewrite the sentence. So the first way is to replace the pronoun with its correct antecedent. And the second one is just to rewrite the sentence. And if we rewrite, right again, if we rewrite that sentence, then we will say Lisa breathed a sigh of relief when she and Kim finally landed. So that is basically vague pronoun referencing. That's where we gave an example of what the vague pronoun referencing is and a possible way in which we can or it can be corrected. And once again, vague means it is unclear. All right, so now we're going to go to aplusstudents.ca. So once again, when we write, then we need to make sure to avoid vague pronoun references. And a vague pronoun reference, it occurs when a pronoun could refer to more than one possible or more than one possible antecedent. So a vague pronoun reference occurs when a pronoun could refer to more than one possible antecedent. And we made an example of Lisa and Kim, right? And we see that in order for us to, let's say, fix or correct that sentence of Lisa and Kim, right? Then there's a few ways in which we can do to correct the. So we spoke about what the example is of the vague pronoun reference, but also ways in which we can correct that vague pronoun reference. And a vague pronoun reference, it also occurs when they, them, their, theirs, it or its is used without its antecedent. So a vague pronoun reference, it also occurs when they, them, their, theirs, it, or its is used without an antecedent. So if we look at the word, the first word, they, right? They say that this nail polish dries in less than 5 minutes. So which means that the pronoun they is used without an antecedent. So the meaning of the sentence is unclear because who are the they that you are talking about? So remember, the meaning of the sentence only becomes unclear if we don't know who we are actually talking about. Either who we are talking about. So the pronoun they is used without an antecedent. So the meaning of the sentence is unclear. And if we fix this problem, and this problem can be fixed also, right, by replacing the pronoun with its missing advertisement. And the advertisements say that this nail polish dries up less in 5 minutes. Advertisements say that this nail polish dries in less than 5 minutes. So the problem can be fixed by replacing the pronoun with its missing antecedent, right? Which is the advertisement. So instead of saying they say that the nail polish dries up in less than 5 minutes, we can say the advertisements, which means that you are now making mention of the advertisements. So these are basically our vague pronoun references. And remember, when you're writing, When you're either writing tests or you're writing letters or you're writing, let's say, essays specifically, then it is very important to be specific, right? Because, for example, if you say things like, Lisa and Kim finally landed, she breathed a sigh of relief, right? So the question is going to be like, who breathed a sigh of relief? Meaning that it is going to be questioned because it is unclear. And the same here with a vague pronoun reference that occurs with the pronouns, right? For example, they say that the nail polish dries in less than 5 minutes. So now you need to ask yourself, now who are the they? But the they is the advertisements. So they say that the nail polish dries in less than 10 minutes. So which of the following contains a vague pronoun reference? Here's basically two of the sentences, right? That says, the first one says, the first choice shows a possible correction for the vague pronoun reference. He has been replaced with Gary. So basically, it says, after Gary explained the chemistry homework to Brian, Gary understood it better too. And after Gary explained the chemistry homework to Brian, he understood it better too. So basically, what's important to know is that we need to know when to write, or when to be specific, or when to write our antecedent in order for us to know. All right, so if we look at this at the bottom, right, I said Fred washed the windscreen of his car even though he knew the car would just get dirty again. So we can even replace that word windscreen with the word it, right? We can replace it with the word it. So once again, if you write, you need to make sure that your sentence, especially sentence constructions, are correct and make sense. Because once the reader starts comparing, not even comparing, once the reader starts questioning what you are saying, then that is what they call a vague pronouns response. So vague pronoun reference, right? It occurs when a pronoun could refer to more than one possible antecedent. And writing pronouns, right, is so convenient to an extent instead of having to rewrite the name of the person all the time. All right, but now, once again, we do have vague pronoun references at times, right? But whenever you are in a situation where you have a vague pronoun reference, then there are different ways in which you can correct it. You can correct it by replacing the pronoun with its correct antecedent, not write the pronoun, or you can then decide to rewrite the sentence in order for your sentences to be clear. All right, let us go to our test. So it says which of the following contains a vague pronoun reference, meaning it is not clear. The Hansons' car looks just like the Estrada's, but theirs has a dent in the bumper. Or the second one says the Hansons' car has a dent in the bumper, but otherwise the car looks just like the Estrada's. So which of the following contains a vague pronoun reference? So they basically want to know which of the following contains a vague pronoun reference. The first one says the Hans's car looks just like the Estrada's, but theirs has a dent in the bumper. So if we look at once again at these two answers, it says the Hanson's car looks just like the Estrada's, but theirs has a dent in the bumper. And then we have the Hans's car has a dent in the bumper, but otherwise the car looks just like the Estrada's. So I think it's the first one. Because here it says the Hans's car looks just like the Estrada's. So yeah. And then they say, but theirs, here's with the confusing one, but theirs has a dent in the bumper. So now I still think, is it who has a dent in the bumper? Is it the Estrada's? So we will then choose the first one because here it says, but theirs has a dent in the bumper. So now I need to know, is it mine that has a dent in the bumper or the Estrada's? And that one is correct. So which of the following contains a vague pronoun reference? Mrs. Hunt's cell phone rang just as she finished brewing Becky a cup of tea. So, which of the following contains a vague pronoun reference? The first one says Mrs. Hunt's cell phone rang just as she finished brewing Becky a cup of tea. And then the second one says just as Mrs. Hunt finished brewing Becky a cup of tea, her cell phone rang. So Mrs. Hunt's cell phone rang just as she finished brewing Becky a cup of tea. Mrs. Hunt's cell phone rang just as she finished brewing Becky a cup of tea, or just as Mrs. Hunt finished brewing Becky a cup of tea, her cell phone rang. All right, let's choose one. All right, let's choose the first one. Or the second one. So the second one is correct. So which of the following contains a vague pronoun reference? Even if you are reading these questions, right, or these sentences, it is so tricky, right? Because basically everything looks the same. So Carly went up and thanked Mr. Mills after he finished performing with Mr. Durant. Or we can say after Mr. Mills finished performing with Mr. Durant, Carly went up and thanked him. So once again, it says Carly went up and thanked Mr. Mills after he finished performing with Mr. Durant. So we said that we need to see which of the following contains a vague pronoun reference. After Mr. Mills finished performing with Mr. Durant, Carly went up and thanked him. So we're going to say it's the first one. Carly went up and thanked Mr. Mills after he finished with Mr. Durant. And he refers to Mr. Mills. So that one was correct because remember, he refers to Mr. Mills. Which of the following contains a vague pronoun reference? Carly takes yoga classes at Mia's studio, so this yoga mat might be hers. So Carly takes yoga classes at Mia's studio, so this yoga mat might be hers. So Carly takes yoga classes at Mia's studio, so this yoga mat might be Carly's. All right, so basically they say Carly takes yoga classes at Mia's studio, so this yoga mat might be her. So basically the first one is correct. We need to identify all of the possible antecedents. And we said that when writing, we need to make sure to avoid vague pronoun references. And a vague pronoun reference occurs when a pronoun could refer to more than one possible antecedent. So we need to identify all the possible antecedents. So they say once again that the vague pronoun reference, it occurs when a pronoun could refer to more than one possible antecedent. And we made an example of Lisa and Kim, where it wasn't clear at all as to who finally, let's say, who breathed a sigh of relief. And then there are possible ways in which we can correct it. If we look at the text, right, it says Thomas Jefferson, who wrote a Declaration of Independence, borrowed ideas from the philosophy of John Locke. He believed in the rights of people to liberty and equality. And the text contains a vague pronoun reference. The pronoun he could refer to Thomas Jefferson or John Locke. feel like the questions. It says here the pronoun she is not vague. Select the one that has a clear antecedent. So where is that one? Oh yeah. So Adele. So Gertrude Adele drew national attention when she became the first woman to swim across the English Channel in 1926. So Gertrude Adele drew national attention when she became the first woman to swim across the English Channel in 1926. I don't think in the sentence there is a vague pronoun reference because, firstly, it is clear. Our antecedent, they said we need to identify our antecedent, and I think here our antecedent is Gertrude Adele. We even have our pronoun, which is she, and that refers to Gertrude becoming the first woman to swim across English Channel. Mhm. All right, so George Gershwin studied piano with Charles Hambitzer and composition with Henry Cowell. His brother Ira wrote the lyrics for many of his compositions. I honestly think here is a vague pronoun reference because we made mention of George Gershwin, we made mention of George Charles Hambitzer, and Henry Cowell, and then it says his older brother Ira wrote the lyrics for many of his compositions, which means that you need to ask yourself whose older brother? Is it Charles's, is it George's, or is it Henry's? But our antecedents are George, Charles, Henry. All right, so let's do our test before we end off. Remember, we said a vague pronoun reference is when either your sentence is not clear, especially when you are using a pronoun within the sentence, right? Using of a pronoun needs to be clear and concise in order for us to make sense of what the sentence is about. So now it says the pronoun in bold is vague. Select all the possible antecedents. So my father puts Lucky in the dog crate whenever he needs to go somewhere. Or my father puts Lucky in the dog crate whenever he needs to go somewhere. Huh? I think it's this one. Lucky and my father. Yes, because Lucky is the dog and my father is my father. When I looked at the photographer or photograph, my uncle and my grandfather, I thought I have a nose just like his. And when I looked at the photograph of my uncle and my grandfather, I thought I have a nose just like his. I think it's the first one because it's my uncle and my grandfather. And even here, George Gershwin studied piano with Charles Hambitzer and composition with Henry Cowell. His older brother Ira wrote the lyrics for many of his compositions. Or is it George Gershwin studied piano with George Charles Hambitzer and composition with Henry Cowell? His older brother Ira wrote the lyrics for many of his compositions. So then we can say it's the first one because it's George, Charles Hambitzer, and Henry that are the antecedents. All right, so that is now the end of our lesson on vague pronoun references. Remember, we said that vague pronoun references is when we add, for example, our pronoun, however, it does not necessarily tell us who or what is actually being mentioned, right? So basically, it's not clear, it is unclear, and it's not concise, our sentence. So it's either you can rewrite your sentence in order for it to be correct, right? Or you can basically just choose a different pronoun. But this is the end of our lesson, grade 7. Thank you very much for being part of the lesson today, and you should have a good day further. Goodbye.